Hey everybody, welcome to my kitchen. This is Dr. Shumway. Today we're making magical beans. Beans are an excellent source of complex carbohydrates and protein. Today we're going to be working with yellow vatana, which is actually a type of yellow pea, and some mung beans. So I soaked about a pound of each overnight in some water, and so they're becoming nice and soft, and they'll be able to cook a lot easier when we cook them today. Now, you can use any kind of bean you want. It can be pinto beans, it can be lima beans, it could be lentils. You could use any pulse. These are all very similar nutritionally, very good sources of protein and complex carbohydrates. But Dr. Shumway, aren't carbohydrates bad for me? Well, actually, complex carbohydrates are a little bit different. So they're broken down slowly over time instead of a Pepsi, which boom, is going to hit your pancreas like that. Can't handle all that sugar at once. So carbohydrates are not necessarily bad for us as long as we have them with enough fiber so that our body can break them down slowly over time. So insulin resistance is the problem that happens when we get too much refined sugar, too much too fast, and the body can't handle that. Those fibers do a lot of other cool stuff too. So obviously the fiber makes us feel more full, and then our gut bacteria can eat it. So when they break down those fibers, they produce other chemicals that are good for us. A randomized controlled trial showed that with diabetic patients randomized to a cup of beans a day, the people who had more beans had lower cholesterols and better controlled sugar. Now we're just going to add enough water to put a couple of inches of water up above those beans. And then we're going to pop that in the pressure cooker. Now if that is intimidating for you, you can always use canned beans too. It's actually a lot simpler and isn't that much different nutritionally. Don't let the cooking scare you off. If you are cooking in a pot, just add a little spritz of oil on the top. Helps keep it from making a mess. I don't know why, it just does. Then for the Instapot, I just seal this thing up and then I push beans. I like to cook it a little bit longer than the recommended just so they're nice and soft. But that's all you gotta do. And then while that's cooking, we go make the rest. Next, you're gonna give yourself a real big pot and you're gonna put some oil in it. Oil, that's not healthy, is it, Dr. Shumway? Well, a little bit can go a long ways. So this is olive oil, and we're just gonna use it just about till it covers the bottom of the pan. So olive oil has actually been shown in observational studies to actually improve cardiovascular mortality. Our next ingredient we're going to add is called fenugreek seeds. We're going to add a couple of tablespoons of this. Now, fenugreek has this really interesting ability where it can increase free testosterone levels. It does that by inhibiting aromatase and 5-alpha reductase, which are enzymes that reduce testosterone into estrogen. So by blocking those enzymes a little bit, we increase our testosterone levels. Pretty cool, right? Fenugreek also decreases bile salt absorption, which can indirectly help you lower cholesterol. Fenugreek also has been shown in placebo-controlled trials as a galactagogue, which means that it can increase breast milk production. But little word of warning, if you have a bleeding condition, it can also have a mild anticoagulant effect. So talk to your doctor before you use too much of the fenugreek. Next thing we're going to add is some mustard seeds. Now, mustard seeds are a good source of glucosinolates and omega-3 fatty acids and minerals like copper, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, sodium, zinc. Next up, we have cumin. So cumin is a powerhouse. We have lots of good terpenes, phenols, flavonoids, alkaloids, strong antioxidant capabilities with this one. Cumin is a good source of iron, and it can help lower cholesterol and help you control blood sugars. One of the other reasons why we add it to these bean recipes is it can help with digestion. So one of the complaints that people have about beans is they say it makes them gassy. Now, most people, if they eat beans every day for a week, will have, some gassiness. That number decreases dramatically by week 2, and by week 3, only about 5% of patients complain of gassiness. But I think that number could be even less if we use things like cumin. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to come over to the fridge and grab our onions. One trick about chopping onions is that if you keep your onions chilled, you are much less likely to cry about it. Also, keep your knife very, very sharp. Boom. And that's how you chop onions. Anyways, quercetin is a flavonol that produces a lot of the benefits from onions. One study of high quercetin onion extracts showed an average reduction of blood pressure by 4 points. Another trial showed a reduction in blood pressure, but also in LDL cholesterol. It also seems to reduce allergy symptoms, lower uric acid levels, and there was a really clever trial that used onions that had the quercetin removed as a placebo that showed that there was even significant results in preserving function in seniors with cognitive impairment. Ooh. Next ingredient up on the list is the almighty garlic. Now, some people have heard that garlic can help reduce blood pressure, and it's true. A meta-analysis shows that an average reduction in systolic blood pressure of about 8 millimeters of mercury, which is similar to some of our first-line blood pressure medicines. But did you know that using garlic powder in cooking or eating whole raw garlic doesn't actually produce the same effect? The difference is the active phytochemical called allicin, which is a defense mechanism used by the plant to avoid being eaten. When the garlic is crushed, then the cell walls are broken down and the chemicals inside are exposed to oxygen. So just kind of like breaking the glow stick, it exposes those chemicals in a way that activates them. So that sulfur-containing compound, allicin, works in our body by effectively decreasing angiotensin, which, as its name suggests, causes blood vessels to constrict and increase pressure. So by blocking angiotensin, we actually lower our blood pressure. Next up, we have peppers. I'll just be using a single serrano pepper because I actually have a little bit of reflux and I'd like to keep the spice down a little bit. Another trick is you can remove the seeds and the skin, and that decreases the lectin content. Lectins, some people are quite sensitive to, and it can cause some gastrointestinal distress. But you go ahead and feel free to increase peppers to your personal tastes. So now we're gonna move the onions, garlic, and the peppers over to our big pot, which is now heating up with all our delicious spices inside. And then we're just mixing in the onions with our spices. Let the flavors mix around, and then we're just gonna let that sit, stirring occasionally until the onions get nice and brown, a little bit caramely. I'm actually gonna add in one more little ingredient while that's browning up. This is a curry leaf tree. My wife is from India, so this is one of her favorites, and it adds an extra special flavor to it. If you don't have this, totally fine. Still gonna taste great. After about 10 or 15 minutes, when onions are looking about like that, we're gonna come over here, we're gonna add our next ingredient, which is tomatoes. Now, lycopene is the magic ingredient in tomatoes. And ideally, you would get a garden fresh tomato right off the vine, but since tomatoes aren't in season right now, actually canned tomatoes is probably your next best bet. The fresh tomatoes at the store are actually picked unripe, and then they gas them so that their lycopene content isn't nearly as high as they are when they're canned, when they're picked at their peak freshness and then preserved. Now, observational studies show that people who had the highest lycopene content were about 55 to 60% less likely to have heart attacks and strokes as compared to those who had the lowest intake of lycopene. Now, that can also be from other factors, but the one mechanism that actually seems really important is that it decreases inflammation and decreases cholesterol through a very similar mechanism as the most common cholesterol-lowering medication. Both statins and the lycopene from tomatoes inhibit an enzyme called HMG coenzyme A reductase, which is the rate-limiting step in cholesterol synthesis. Surprisingly, lycopene levels are actually increased when tomatoes are cooked, 54% after 2 minutes and up to 164% after 30 minutes. But we're just going to let that simmer for about 10-15 minutes or so, and by then our beans should be done. So come on over here. We're going to grab these. All right, there's going to be a little bit of water in there, and we're going to need some moisture. So I'm actually going to leave it how it is for this one because it soaked up most of the moisture into the beans. And then we're just going to stir that all in there together. Make sure we get the onions and tomatoes all mixed in there good. And then we're going to add just a couple more things. The next ingredient we're going to add is turmeric. Now you may have heard of some of the benefits of turmeric. It has a very strong anti-inflammatory compound in here called curcumin. So curcumin is actually about 4% of the total content of the turmeric root. And so we don't actually get that much of it in our food. But we are going to add a bunch of it. About 4 or 5 tablespoons. Now, our bodies, if we just put the turmeric, won't absorb hardly any of that. We have an enzyme called glucuronidase, which will take those curcumins and get them gone. But if you add a little black pepper has an ingredient in there called piperine, which is a very potent glucuronidase inhibitor. So when we add black pepper to the turmeric, it now becomes readily absorbed, and those anti-inflammatory effects can happen in your body. So there's actually been studies that have compared ibuprofen and turmeric for arthritis and been shown to have very similar benefits. And also proton pump inhibitors like omeprazole and curcumin have gone in head-to-head trials being compared for reflux. So lots of benefits to curcumin, and that's pretty much our dish. Once we get that mixed in good, let it cool down, this thing is going to be ready to eat. So one more step that's completely optional is I like to add a little bit of coconut milk to mine. Most people are used to having a little bit of fat in their beans, and traditional recipes will use things like lard or bacon or meats, but coconut milk is a pretty good replacement. So it has fats in it. There are medium chain triglycerides. They do increase cholesterol a little bit, but not too much. And there's a lot of cholesterol lowering stuff in here. So for flavor's sake, I like it this way, but you can definitely skip this step and it's still delicious. Now, of course, one of the advantages of doing this in a big pot is that you can have enough for the whole week. So meal prepping is key for lots of healthy eating, because then you only have to be motivated one time a week instead of 3 times a day. Once you plan ahead, you'll have a meal ready every day. I found that this recipe makes enough for about 6 days of lunches if this is the only thing that I'm eating. Another couple of tricks is if you eat some oranges beforehand, you can increase your absorption of the iron in the beans. So if you're anemic or trying to boost your iron levels, that's one good way to do that. I also love to take an apple to eat after it because, well, it has garlic and my breath will stink. And so that way I'm good to go back to clinic without smelling all these delicious spices on my breath. Apples have a way of cutting out on some of the odors. Now, another important part of this is that this is very low cost. So the beans, obviously, depending on the type of bean, the price will vary, but it's between $1 and $2 per pound of dry beans. And that makes enough for, like I said, 5 to 6 meals. So you spread that across there and you're looking at about 40 to 80 cents per day. If you take the onions, a couple of pounds of onions costs, about $2, $2 to $4. So that's another, 40 to 80 cents per day. Add in the tomatoes, a can of tomatoes for $2 a can. You're getting 4 or 5 or 5 or 6 servings worth for 40 cents. Mustard seeds, you got $2.49 for 2 pounds of mustard seeds, which gets it at just pennies per day. And that's the same with a lot of these spices. So the fenugreek, cumin, turmeric, it may seem expensive when you're buying the big packages, but those go a very long ways, and that can cook you a lot of meals. So overall, you're looking at a meal that's just, a couple of dollars per meal. Very nutritious. So yeah, there you have it. Delicious magic beans.